Hello everyone, here is number 16 in my series of talks about the history of English detective fiction from 1920 to about 1960. Thank you for opening the file. Tonight I want to look at how the fashion for book collecting during the Golden Age impacted on the genre. First, a confession. Detective fiction and collecting occupy so much of my life that there is very little time to talk of anything else. In fact, they are both so consuming that I'm bound to say that the sort of person who puzzles over a whodunit, placing clues in order and challenging the author's red herrings, is probably the same sort of person who is fascinated by card indexes, the order of books on shelves, and the minute differences between different printings of the same edition. Why do readers collect detective fiction? You mean you can do one without the other? Collecting detective fiction as we know it began in 1934 when John Carter included a relevant chapter in his New Paths in Book Collecting, and the first booksellers' catalogue of mystery books appeared in London. However, I want to look at the passion from a more populist level. Those book buyers who gathered up detective books not with any thought of investment, usually a dubious gamble where books are concerned, or critical accomplishment, but because they wanted to complete their shelves of a particular series or niche within the detective fiction lists. This will show us how the habits of the collector and the acumen of the writers and publishers together directed the growth of the genre as, in the middle to late 30s, publishers began to respond to the growing collector's market, a market that would blossom in the post-war period. The prerequisite is that the general reader needed to believe that the books were worth keeping. Remembering that detective fiction developed from thrillers of the penny dreadful and short story pulps, which were produced as read and throw away items, detective fiction emerged from this unfortunate label only when readers found value in rereading the books, even when they knew the solution to the mystery. If the books were no more than a railway read, why would you read a whodunit when you knew whodunit? The fact is, readers found something new each time they returned to a well-turned-out detective novel. Agatha Christie's Murder of Roger Ackroyd is probably the most obvious example. And in a later podcast, we will look at the French critic Roland Barthes's thoughts on this subject. So the very fact that people were collecting detective fiction shows that it had established its worth beyond reading for a train journey. Coincidentally, publishers have started to promote the branding of their titles. We've already looked at the influence of Collins' Crime Club from 1930 onwards. By joining the mailing list, readers were, aware or not, bringing on themselves a feeling of loyalty to the list. Since they were members of the club, many readers bought titles that would not have been their first choice, and many found it difficult to discard the books which the privilege of membership had bought them. Other publishers went for their own branding techniques. The Hodden and Stoughton Yellow Jackets, the distinctive Gollancz and MacDonald dust wrappers, and the books from Jenkins with their recognisable green logo. But it was the growth of paperback productions which baked loyalty on an even higher level. Penguin's crime imprint with the green covers. When they were first introduced, there was still a general snootiness in England against paperbacks. Although the reputation of Penguin reduced this to some extent, for many years many people would buy no other paperbacks than green Penguins. The editor's choice was so discriminating that green Penguins are very much collected today, although many of my customers specify English authors only, please. Something of a shame. They were followed in England by Collins' White Circle Crime, Pan and Corgi. Paperback publishers began to print catalogue numbers on the spines of their books, and, as every marketeer will tell you, if you present a series of numbers to your customers, many will want to collect the lot. The populist quality of this type of collecting is emphasised by the growth of the book clubs. The Mystery Guild, the Companion Book Club are two examples, again in England, that delivered books in house-style dust wrappers, and the run of them looked good on the shelf. Many readers were reluctant to part with the shelves of matching books which they had collected, and only gave in when space became a problem. Oh, I regret getting rid of my run of 1950s Mystery Guilds. A third encouragement to collect was the development of series characters. Now, of course, series characters had been solving crimes for years, but many had been sold in flimsy, almost disreputable styles. The demand for more and more hardback fiction meant that authors were driven to rely on characters already in the cupboard. This, in turn, fed the collecting impulse. Even today, I frequently hear customers in my bookshop seeking out titles missing from their shelf of a particular character, even while they concede that some of the books do not come up to scratch. The need to complete overrides that consideration. Now, in drawing these threads together, I want to point out the relatively short period when this development occurred. It started in the late 30s. The war interrupted innovation, and it accelerated further in the late 40s to mid-50s. The habit lasted much longer, of course, but its rapid expansion of generic design, paperback production, and book club marketing was probably less than 10 years. Detective book collecting continued beyond the Golden Age, but it changed. Some of the new generation were drawn to cover art of paperbacks, while others appreciated the antiquarian quality of the original editions. For these, Howard Haycraft published his Murder for Pleasure in 1942, where he suggested titles that might be milestones for a serious collector. The Encyclopedia of Mystery and Detection by Steinbrugger and Penzler was published in 1975, and Alan Hubin's Perpetual Bibliography of Crime Fiction, probably the most thumbed book in my own library, first appeared in 1979. Diligent collectors like Eric Quayle and Robert Adey emerged. If I mention those two when there are dozens more, it is to recognise that they were always eager to share their knowledge. If generic dust wrappers, numbered spines, named series and club loyalty were filling our bookcases, what was the rebound effect on writers? To be collectible, writers had to produce books worth keeping. That meant rereading. They needed to give readers what they wanted, so the sustenance of familiar characters became self-fulfilling. We wanted more, and the more we got, the more we wanted. But the collector specialises, and often specialises in more of the same, so it became difficult to introduce radical new forms of the detective story in the same format without disappointing as many existing readers as it excited new ones. As we shall see, that would have far-reaching consequences for the genre. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to episode 16 in my series of talks about the history of English detective fiction. My name is Malcolm Noble. My website is malcolmnoble.com. I hope you'll take a look at it. The podcast page on that website includes a list of previous episodes with links if you wish to catch up. I need to thank Freeze Effects for the royalty-free music. I posted this podcast on the 1st of June and will upload the next one on the 15th. I hope that you'll be there to listen. In the meantime, all that remains is for me to wish you good night and God bless.